The International Christian Embassy Jerusalem is your embassy in the heart of Israel, founded in 1980. From our headquarters in Jerusalem through our branches in over 80 nations and yours in Canada, we seek to challenge the Church to take up its scriptural responsibilities, to remind Israel of the promises made to her in the Bible, and to be a source of practical assistance to all the people in the land of Israel. On today's program, a visit to Biblical Reserve in the Holy Land, a sermon about the role of the Church as it pertains to Israel, and a continuation of an artist's depiction of the crucifixion and the Holocaust through a fountain of tears. The desolate land will be cultivated instead of being a desolation in the sight of everyone who passes by. They will say, "This desolate land has become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste desolate and ruined cities are fortified and inhabited. Then the nations that are left round about you will know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt the ruined places and planted that which was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken and will do it."
Here is the most beautiful example of an ancient olive tree, which is possibly hundreds and hundreds of years old. I love looking at the trunks of olive trees because they remind me of like old people. They have so much expression in the wrinkles, and you can see that this tree has seen a long life. These olive trees that we have here in the reserve were brought here and rescued here from places. For example, when they built the main road, the route number 1 from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and they transplanted a lot of the trees to up here. And you can see exactly here why and how an olive tree lives for so long. The story behind it. If you look inside, there is no more mother trunk. The original mother trunk has no longer exists. The whole tree's existence is based on the fact that each time it needs to carry on growing, it recreates itself a whole new system of roots, new roots and shoots growing out of it in order for it to keep on, in order to carry on. There is a beautiful psalm which talks about the father sitting at the table with his children, like the olive saplings around the olive tree, his children around the table. And it's we think about the whole thing of generations. There's the grandparents and the parents, and then you can already see here the start of the children and the grandchildren. The family tree, very much a family tree. But if we go to our roots, we understand, if we go to the book of Isaiah chapter 11, it talks here, "But a shoot shall grow out of the stump of Jesse, a twig shall sprout from his stalk." And that is exactly what it's saying here. The new shoot comes out of the olive tree, like Jesus came out of the house of Jesse. And if you take the word for shoot in Hebrew, the word for shoot in Hebrew is a netzel. Okay? If you go to the town of Christian, Natzrut, Christianity, Notzarim, Christians. And if you go even more than that, you take the town of Nazareth. It's the same root, Natzrat. What did they do in Nazareth? They grafted new olive trees. That was their profession. The Nazarenes were olive tree grafters. And that is what is the shoot, the root is the whole shoot of Christianity is being compared here to the olive tree. And if you take a look at an olive tree, if you stand back and if you look at an olive tree from the distance, it's hard to tell because we don't have a sunny day. However, if you stand and look at an olive tree on a sunny day, it's silver underneath, exactly. You look at the top of the olive trees,
it's beautiful silver.
If you look, it has one side of the leaf is dark green, the other side is light. Basically, as the day goes on, what does the olive tree do? A tree, in order to get food, it takes the dark side, it does the process of photosynthesis, but as it's decided during the day it's had enough food, what does it do? It turns its leaves outwards, so the silver side is facing outwards. So if you look at the top, so it reflects the light, and it literally looks like a halo. An olive tree on a sunny day, you look at the tops of the olive tree, it literally looks like a halo. It's glowing. Again, the tree of light, literally and physically and metaphorically, spiritually, it is the tree of light. We say that the dove brought light into the world, and the dove chose the olive tree to bring the branch of the olive tree back onto the ark, which symbolized to Noah that both the waters had gone down, but also it symbolized that the dove, who could have chosen to be in the ark and eat good food and not leave, he chose to leave the ark and only have the bitter olive to eat, but also he wanted his freedom. And that is why we say the dove brought light into the world, as we know the olive oil we saw before produced the clearest flame. It brings us light into darkness. It lit up the temple. The temple was destroyed, but on the emblem for the state of Israel, we have the olive branches and the menorah to show the candelabra, to show that the light is still here, and we kept the light burning for 2,000 years while we were in the diaspora. But we re-brought that light back into the land of Israel in 1948 when we recreated the state and put that emblem onto the emblem of the state of Israel. Beautiful.
Are you a pastor or Christian leader and want to experience Israel, the people, and the culture? This January 25th through February 2nd, 2015, for approximately $2,000, including airfare and tax, from major Canadian gateways and 3-star hotels, see and experience the Holy Land where Jesus lived, walked, and taught. The Galilee, Tiberias, Capernaum, Caesarea, experience the Dead Sea, see Masada, and of course Jerusalem, the Garden Tomb, the Old City, and oh, so much more. Call now to inquire at 1-866-324-9133. Space is limited at this incredible price. Call now. Up next, a word about the role of the church as it pertains to Israel.
Now, my responsibility is to speak to you about the church's relationship with Israel. I'm speaking to you about a marriage, a covenant relationship. Now, I know in a North American context, we have a difficult time understanding that word covenant. That's the language the Bible uses. We understand the language of contracts, but contracts usually have loopholes that can be broken. But covenant speaks of life and death situations. And this is why I choose to use the Word of God, the Bible, what the Bible says about the church's relationship with Israel. Now, I'm going to be speaking to you about this covenant relationship. As I mentioned to you, I'll be looking at the prophetic understanding of the church's responsibility with Israel. But I wanted to share some thoughts as I begin to talk to you about this. In the apostolic letter of the letter to the Ephesian believers, the Apostle Paul clearly articulates God's ultimate plan of redemption and the culmination of all things. He presents his case beginning in chapter 2 of the book of Ephesians, verse 11, by addressing the Gentile believers as the uncircumcised foreigners and strangers to the covenants of God and to the nation of Israel, without hope and without God. But now through Messiah, Gentile believers can become one with Israel, accessing the promises of the covenant, fulfilling the one new man plan of God, reconciling the Jew and Gentile believers together back to the Father. The end result of this union is clearly expressed in verse 19. So then you are no longer foreigners and strangers. On the contrary, you are fellow citizens with God's people and the members of God's family. The posture of a Ruth-like church. Now, I believe you're all Christian leaders. You know what I'm talking about. When we talk about Ruth, the Moabitess, the book of Ruth, or the scroll or megaloth of Ruth, the posture of a Ruth-like church that declares, wherever you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. And where you die, because usually everybody stops right there. You know, where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. But they don't quote the very next phrase. Where you die, I will die. Now that speaks to me of covenant, doesn't it? This is beginning to melt the hardest Jewish hearts. As Ruth clung to her Jewish mother-in-law and would not let go, the church must do the same with Israel. Only a sacrificial, unconditional love can reach the people and cause Israel to jealousy, so to speak, as they observe the extravagant love that believers have for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the story of Ruth, I believe, embodies this concept of the one new man and remains as the most powerful example of what it means to be grafted in for Gentiles. A brief cursory look at this book. The story begins with a family from Bethlehem, which literally means in Hebrew, house of bread. This village was aptly called so because of the abundance of grain and the very fertile soil that was used for wheat and barley growing. However, a famine strikes the area and life becomes very difficult. The father Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and her two sons Mahlon and Chilion decide to leave their home and village and settled in the country of Moab, which is modern-day Jordan. The two sons in the course of time get married to two Gentile women, Orpah and Ruth. Now, for a moment, consider the initial parallel. The family is forced to leave their homeland because of a crisis and thus joins the diaspora of many Jews throughout the world. While in the diaspora, their children intermarry, as is also very common often throughout history till this day in the diaspora of the Jews. The scripture very simply gives us highlights of this family story by simply saying in chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, that they lived in Moab 10 years. And then the two sons died. We're not told how nor why they died, but that they joined their father Elimelech, who had died already. Tragedy had touched this family. Naomi is left with her two daughters-in-law, and all three were widows who were facing a very grim future. When you consider that in those days there were no social government-sponsored programs that they could access, a woman's life and welfare was dependent upon the husband or father. They were at crossroads in life, seeking to find answers to their questions of why God. Naomi's cry was from a deep wound of disillusionment and confusion, for she states in verse 13, I feel very bitter that the hand of Adonai has gone out against me. And I believe that within the heart of our people there remains this little corner of room where is nurtured this question and all the emotions that go with it. Why God? Why God? In Naomi, we see the picture of the Jews in diaspora through the centuries. Victims to trouble and tragedy not of their making. But there is a turn of events. Naomi hears that Elohim has looked with favor upon the land of Israel, which was prospering agriculturally again, so she decides to return and do aliyah back to Israel. It was time for her to return to her land. The word aliyah, as was aptly said before, very simply means to go up, to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. Now consider today's parallel. Ooh, glory, I'm getting very excited here. We have witnessed the modern day miracle on May 15th, 1948, when David Ben-Gurion declared that the official state of Israel and the Jewish people were now legally and democratically back in the land. The diaspora wandering Jews, if he or she so chose to, could return to the land of promise and inheritance even in the face of hardship and war. This picture is so prophetic as Naomi announces to her two daughters-in-law, I'm going back and you must return to your relatives. They begin to weep. They hold on to her, refusing to let her go. But she insists that she could not provide them with more sons. Therefore, they should return back to their extended families. The response of Orpah, and this is the key point now. If you miss this, you've missed it all. The response of Orpah and Ruth to Naomi is a picture of the Gentile church as a whole in their relationship to Israel. Orpah loved her mother-in-law. There was no question that she didn't love Israel. Orpah loved her mother-in-law and was ready to go with her. But when push came to shove, so to speak, she capitulated and retreated to pursue her own security, comfort, and convenience. Many believers and churches today worldwide recognize the role and place of Israel. From a biblical perspective, how can you not? They recognize the role and the place of Israel. They honor the Jewish people and Israel because of biblical history. But when it comes to push and shove, they will kiss symbolically, just as Orpah did. Kiss symbolically Israel and abandon her. To me, it's very sad that they had the privilege of entering into covenant with the Jewish people, but refuse to maintain their covenant relationship because it was not convenient or that it would be too great a sacrifice. Ruth, on the other hand, refused to leave. Ruth's posture should be the posture of every Gentile believer and church that says, I love Jesus, or I love the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That should be the posture. And there's nothing less than that. The words of this young Gentile widow model for the church covenant love and relationship. Don't press me to leave you and stop following you, for wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Adonai, now notice the wording here. Notice their confession. May the Lord, may Adonai bring terrible curses on me, and worse ones as well, if anything but death separates you and me. Friends, that's the posture. That's the relationship that God is looking for, desiring the church to have with Israel.
Previously on Inside Israel with ICEJ Canada.
Actually born in Toronto, and then when I was about 19-20, went to British Columbia. And I thought to myself, if there's a God, and I'm beginning to think that there is, he must have something to do with these Jews. I have to go and see this place. So I decided then that I would work on a kibbutz for 6 months.
Let's take a look at what you've created here. It's 12 feet by 60 feet long. It's the Fountain of Tears. Let's take a look.
The Fountain of Tears is a sculptured dialogue of suffering between the crucifixion and the Holocaust. The Fountain of Tears is a wall, 60 feet long and 12 feet high. It has 7 panels made of Jerusalem stone and 6 pillars of field stones. Facing each one of the panels are 7 life-size bronze figures. The title, The Fountain of Tears, is taken from a verse in the Bible from the book of Jeremiah. The prophet is crying out to God, O Lord, that my head were a spring of water, and my eyes a fountain of tears, that I would weep day and night for the slain of my people. The 7 panels are high-relief sculptures, each depicting a different crucifixion scene. Each crucifixion panel relates to each one of the last 7 statements spoken by Jesus in the last moments of his life. The 6 pillars of stones act as dividers between each of the 7 panels. These pillars represent a memorial to the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. The 7 bronze figures symbolize a Holocaust survivor. His head is shaved, and he is dressed in the striped clothes of the concentration camp. Each figure is responding and identifying to each word spoken from the crucifixion. There is also water that very slowly trickles over the pillars of stones, symbolizing the tears from the cry of Jeremiah. The water from each of the pillars is channeled out of the courtyard to irrigate 6 olive trees. At the south end of the courtyard is a sculpture called Gethsemane. This depicts the struggle over the cup of suffering, the beginning of the crucifixion. At the opposite end of the courtyard are two sculptures, the butterfly and the empty cup, both symbolizing resurrection. All of these elements come together to tell a story, to relate a possibility, to ask a question. Could the crucifixion and the Holocaust have something in common with each other's pain? Now, it has been said over and over again historically that the suffering of the crucifixion actually created the suffering for the other, the Jewish people, in the Holocaust. So it is important to understand the process of artistic creation in this work in order to understand its communication. The artist has taken these last 7 words of Jesus and has done a creative meditation on each one to see if there is identification which would somehow connect the two. The artist, Rick Winicki, is originally Canadian. He came to Israel as a 21-year-old drawn by his fascination with the rising of the Jewish state out of the ashes of the Holocaust. He sees himself as a believer in Jesus and has lived in Israel now for over 30 years. He deeply understands the conflict of the crucifixion and the Holocaust that he has brought together in this work. It all begins with Gethsemane. This piece depicts Jesus struggling with the cup of sorrows. He himself is poured out over a large stone. His hands are holding the cup, and he is struggling over the decision of doing the will of the Father or his own. In deciding to do the Father's will, the cup is full. It is the beginning of the crucifixion. The first panel is, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The figure representing Jesus crucified is making a declaration. His hands are open and his face is intentional. In these words, he is creating a covenant of forgiveness. The figure representing the Holocaust can identify to being killed violently, intentionally. But can he forgive or even ask God to forgive? He struggles. He clutches his heart and leans into the stones that symbolize the perished. The survivor fears that if he forgives, will those who are killed be forgotten?
Plan now to attend the Christian celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles 2014 in Jerusalem. Since its inception in 1980, the Christian celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, sponsored by the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, has been a vital and central part of the International Christian Embassy's ministry of comforting Israel. Pilgrims come from many nations to worship the Lord, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and to bless Israel in this time of regathering. Join with Christians from around the globe as you enjoy worship, dance, and a chance to stand with Israel.
Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to visit our website at www.icejcanada.tv. 100% of what we receive from you toward a project goes to that designation. Through your contribution to ICEJ Canada, you can participate by giving to Bet Singer Children's Orphanage Bathrooms, Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, Home for Holocaust Survivors, Israeli Youth at Risk Summer Camp in Canada, Operation Life Shield Bomb-Proof Shelters, Red Carpet Project Women at Risk in Tel Aviv, Shoulder to Shoulder New Immigrant Partner Project, Women's Shelter Project, General Fund, Gift Estate Securities Funds, ICEJ Communication Media Fund.
above the lintel, that is the Arabic inscription script, yes. Part of the colorful history of this building, at one time it served the local Muslim community.
You should be running out that way.
Yeah.